It is so good to see Reverend Rodney back in our worship services, and it is so good to see all of you here. We are so grateful to all of you who are joining us virtually. Those on the patio, can we give a big shout out to the patio and the Borton Hall? We're really grateful. So it is so wonderful to be gathered together. Thank you to everyone who has made that possible. With a sinking heart, I noticed a sign on my neighbor's lawn a couple weeks ago. Moms for Liberty. A few months ago, in the first weeks of my beloved grandchild's life, I had actually stopped at that yard and talked to those neighbors because they were giving away a swing, and I picked it up and took it to my child after cleaning it. The dad was pleasant and generous, and yet I wasn't surprised in this 2021 to read on the website that this group, which has chapters all over the nation, but only 3 in California, one of which is in our county, included a statement that masking is a form of child abuse. These moms pray now for liberty, they say daily, and I now pray for the safety of a toddler I have never met. A toddler whose parents love their child just as my daughter and son-in-law love theirs, and yet, here we are. The special cocktail of 2021 seems to be a fairly lethal concoction of rights and rage and reckless recasting of the truth. I doubt many listening need examples. However, because together we can hold what's hard for us to hold alone, I'm going to give you a few of them. The right to bear arms, even in the hallowed halls of our nation's capital, set the tone for this year. The right to refuse to get vaccinated, which has led to our nation, the nation with perhaps the greatest access to vaccines, to be now one of the deep red global spaces in our world. And a quiet story many may have missed this week as we rightfully marked the death of 3,000 people on September 11th in 2001, is the way that the larger pharmaceutical companies this week, who fueled an opioid epidemic that claimed 90,000 lives last year alone in 2020, are now exercising their rights to bankruptcy, which will protect their corporate interests and also the personal fortunes of families such as the Sacklers. This is the world in which we live, and I could list more. Yet this headline, I think, from a Texas paper may sum it up, the madness of these last weeks. After crushing women's rights to choose, Governor Greg Abbott says Texans have the right to choose not to get vaxxed. That's pretty much it, right? Yeah. This is my public service announcement, by the way. This could actually happen in a state near you. If you haven't found the time yet, please drop your ballot in a ballot box sometime in the next couple days, right? Yes. I love having the drums back. When I searched for a definition of liberty on the internet a few weeks ago in preparation for this service, the top offerings that came up in my browser all spoke of the extreme ends of that right. In other words, liberty was the ability to be free to do anything that you wanted. That was how it was defined. It was individual, clearly, not collective, not the goal of the idealistic welcome of the Statue of Liberty offering sanctuary for the huddled masses. I believe, and I think we believe from our tradition, that true liberty is that which is found when we create a society and a world where the basic rights of people are honored and protected and made possible. The 1948 United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is worth reading, I learned. Though it's not, I will say, a shining example of any gender-inclusive language. It still struggles even with the binary, but it still sets forward some very basic rights that we are still working for in this nation and around the globe, as the news from recent weeks in Afghanistan reminds us. In this slow mudslide of maddening poppycock all around us, the idea of rights has become simply tied to our individual preferences. rights which in a democratic process should be granted to individuals through our collective discernment and governance processes, which are also tied to larger ideas of responsibility, which are shared. We have long struggled with the idea of whose rights really matter. And on this weekend, when we do remember the horrific events of September 11th in 2001, and we also need to remember the many, many lives, including those of our Muslim neighbors, which remain affected by those events. The dangers of anger and the false sense of rights, which is always before us now. Whenever someone waxes nostalgic about how we all came together in the aftermath of 9/11, I remember being on the mandatory search list for 6 months, and particularly the time that, because my name had too many vowels, I was forced to set down my screaming, terrified 2-year-old so that men with semi-automatic weapons slipping down their shoulders could pat me down in our little podunk Charlottesville airport. In an era when we are wearied by sheltering in place, by sweating under masks, by getting our masks tangled in our microphones, and by having to do an ethical inventory for every act we do, it seems, like, do I give my neighbor a ride to the doctor? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Do I hug my friend? It becomes a moral crucible. We can see the devastating ironies here because sometimes it does feel like we're in a war against our own mind. The people who are exercising their rights not to mask or not to get vaccinated are creating the conditions that prolong our needs to do that. That's the irony. And so you might ask, why is this a faith question? What does this all have to do with us as people in this faith? Author and founder of the Insight Meditation Society, Sharon Salzberg, reminds us that anger is not by its nature the problem. Because we believe it, we sometimes suppress it. We believe that it could be, that it's wrong. We suppress it till it comes out in its most volcanic and incendiary forms. She says, in Buddhism, we say anger is when we reach for, when we feel weak, because we think it will make us strong. It functions to overcome a sense of helplessness, which for many of us is an almost unbearable feeling. She says that through anger, we gain a sense of agency, power, pride, and righteousness. Those are temporary gifts, but in the long term, what it does is keep us from our shared connections and responsibilities. Most people discover that when hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with their own pain. Sitting together in shared pain is part of what we can do together, as is re-strengthening our commitments to use our anger towards change. We can also stop being the people, we can be the people who root out the false news and who understand that personal preference is not the same as a right, that to live together in equality means we prioritize our collective health, safety, and well-being. We too can be susceptible to the ingredients in this lethal cocktail, and it's lethal, not just to our personal health, but to our nation and our world. Together, I do believe that we can face what we can't hold alone. We could be at the place where we acknowledge our fears to one another, where we learn to express our sadness and our anger. We can be the place where we remind ourselves of our common responsibilities and commitments. In this week of Yom Kippur, this time of atonement, which has been so nourishing to so many of us, can we not think about atoning by unmiring ourselves from the comfortable mud of resentment? Our resenting those whose resentment threatens our democracy may only hasten its demise. Sharon Salzberg reminds us that resentment does nothing to the person we resent. Rather, it saps our energy we could better put into a lot of things. Community building, appreciating joy, connecting to others, and learning how to live in this world that is clearly much more complicated than it used to be. Breathe in and breathe out. We need to give up some things to reemerge into this pandemic reshaped world. We need to give up the sense of powerlessness we feel and to reclaim our proper sense of power. We need to let go of some of our resentment and maybe stop worshiping a little bit at the altars of Amazon and Netflix and reconnect to real people as we can. We need to recognize the righteous anger we each feel and redirect it to a truer sense of protecting essential rights so that all can thrive. This year, perhaps more than others, wearied by loss and battered by change, it may be very hard just to breathe in and breathe out, to honor that hymn that Sarah Dan Jones, my colleague, wrote 20 years ago, to hold the ancient wisdom of our spiritual inheritance. But may we covenant together in this space to be the keepers of a larger moral imagination that says that if we forgive ourselves and each other, we can begin again in love.